What's going to happen with gun laws in 2025? We've got a new administration coming, Tom. We've got lots of opportunity for changes in gun laws, gun policy, things like that, where, you know, the AR pistol brace rule is here, it's there, it's everywhere. What do you see on the horizon for things that might impact law-abiding gun owners with the new administration coming to Washington, D.C. on the 20th of January?
Boy, so in no particular order, let's start long-term. Long-term, by far, the biggest change is going to be the potential 1 or 2 Supreme Court justice picks that President Trump may be able to make that, if history is any indication, will probably be very pro-gun, okay? And
that's a good thing.
Some people could quibble about that because there's some questions about something that happened with one of them. We won't go into those details right now. But at a minimum, more pro-gun than if Trump had lost. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
And that is not only true at the United States Supreme Court level, but that is also true at the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the next rung down, as well as the federal district trial courts. So he's going to be able to appoint many, many dozens of judges over the course of 4 years, who will presumably, as I mentioned before, kind of salt in a pro-2A-ness to the federal judiciary. Because keep in mind, as many people may not know, these are lifetime appointments, all these positions. So typically these positions are filled anywhere from a 15 to even a 30-year outlook. So that's a big deal. That's a big, big deal. So that's a huge long-term outlook. That's a huge long-term gain for the Second Amendment. Because the only way that you can really, the only influence on choosing judges, aside from winning the United States Senate, who are the people who have to approve them, is to win the White House, who's the individual who will choose and appoint them, right? So that's, I think, the biggest long-term thing. And then obviously all the effects that come out of the courts from that. We're talking about Garland versus Vanderstock. So we're talking about the so-called ghost gun case. We're talking about potential assault weapons cases. So what's the legality of not only AR-15s and all those evil, vicious semi-automatic rifles, centerfire rifles. Well, I'm sure some of them are probably 22s as well, but we're also talking about what's going to be the constitutionality of magazines. Are magazines an accoutrement, as not my words, is it an accoutrement, or is it something that's protected by the Second Amendment? That's kind of the battle lines on that. So there's a really good chance that if these questions do not get addressed in 2025, that they will be imminently addressed by 2026. So we're going to have a lot of Second Amendment things cropping up across the next, let's just go big and say 24 months.
What I'm hoping for is maybe some national concealed carry reciprocity. And again, the jury's out on that. We would love to have national concealed carry reciprocity, but holy cow, does that open a can of worms for who's regulating what as we go down the line. But it's out there. The bill is out there. People are talking about national concealed carry reciprocity. Do you see that coming to the floor?
Yeah, I think it will come to the floor. I have been expressing that very concern for years, however, that look, for people who do not live in anti-gun states, there's so many ways on how this could go wrong. Because what is currently being regulated by your own state legislature, is that going to be getting regulated through Washington, D.C.? Because if you're pro-2A for the next 4 years, maybe that sounds like a good deal. But if you're pro-2A, we don't know what's going to happen in 2028 and beyond. Do you really want D.C. somehow being able to regulate where and how and maybe why you're allowed to carry your firearm? Now, I'm not suggesting that that's what will happen. What I am saying is that you haven't been paying attention if you don't think that's what people will try to make happen. Once we reroute the river flow from the state level, at least to some degree, through the federal level. And I understand that there are very protective two-way ways you can try to do this, of just saying, look, it's nothing more than forcing states to recognize each other's permits or something like that, right? And this could happen through the courts, and there's questions about whether or not this will happen through the courts as well. But at the end of the day here, I definitely have concerns that I fear will be realized about that which goes to DC does not tend to come home, and it tends to only get worse with time. And it makes me a little bit worried as someone who lives in a purplish state. Could things be better when it comes to CCW? Yeah, but they could also be a heck of a lot worse.
Yes, absolutely. And I think about that every time we talk about a big Supreme Court win, that, a pro-gun win, that those anti-gun states then just sort of double down on trying to find other ways around that Supreme Court win. And you saw it in New York, and you see it in Illinois and in other states where they're trying really hard to restrict gun ownership and gun carrying and all of those sorts of things. It's not like the anti-gun forces just give up, like, oh, we lost. Okay, it's over now. I'm done. They never seem to be done, and there's got to be more that's coming up in the coming year or two that we're facing.
Oh, for sure. There's institutionalized aggression and violence against the Constitution, for sure. And there's different ways that happens. One is, as you mentioned, happening through state legislatures passing absolutely awful laws, so-called assault weapons bans, magazine bans, bans basically restricting where, how you can carry, just on and on and on. One of my least favorite ones was the private property inversion, where the government has just decided that, no one's allowed to carry on any private property unless they publicly post or somehow explicitly let you know, check your local listings, that you're allowed to carry there. And I don't understand, is that the way how free speech works? That you're not allowed to utter a word about politics, religion, or anything else unless it's explicitly posted.
Yeah.
This just goes back to the fact that the antis are always treating the Second Amendment like a second-class right, and I don't know what's a more picture-perfect example than this. So we've got the hostility and the violence coming towards the Constitution from state legislatures. But another thing that happens is we also have the reemergence, not that it ever really went away, but we have the reemergence of lawfare, of particularly the weapons of government being used through states' attorney general's offices and municipalities to sue gun manufacturers and different people to go after them. And a lot of people who may be watching this either weren't paying attention or they weren't old enough or around to remember the last time we really went through this, back in the late 90s to early 2000s. There were so many coordinated lawsuits brought by different levels of government and a few nonprofits against firearm manufacturers. It put multiple firearm manufacturers out of business, including one that was one of the top 10 largest in the United States at the time. So these are not like peripheral mom and pop, CNC shops somewhere, right? It was estimated firearm manufacturers in aggregate $1 million per day
just to
defend against the crap.
Yeah.
That were specifically manufactured. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. You can Google this. They bragged about the fact that they specifically filed these lawsuits to make them difficult to consolidate, to make them as litigious and expensive as possible to defend, understanding that we might lose every single one of these at the end of the day. But we're playing the game with taxpayer dollars, so it doesn't matter if we lose. We can always file again. And at the end of the day, these people are defending themselves from a limited, finite resource pool.
Right.
And there were, if people want to, if viewers want to see a video about that, because it was crazy. One of the major firearm companies out there, well, I won't name them right now. We'll use that as a teaser if people want it. But a major one that I promise everyone watching this video knows, one of the biggest and most well-known firearm manufacturers actually caved to the demands. There was another major player who almost caved. Rumor was that they were on the cusp of caving, who's one of the most popular manufactured firearms in the entire United States. This was big deal stuff until it got shut down with the Protection of Lawful Commerce Act, which doesn't matter if judges don't throw out frivolous lawsuits against gun manufacturers, so that's kind of the sidestep.
It doesn't mean people, this Protection of Lawful Commerce law doesn't mean people can't file the lawsuits. It means the judges are supposed to throw them out.
Right.
And in many cases, they don't. They're not throwing them out. Hopefully, the crop of new judges will be a little bit more 2A friendly and move that forward. Anything else that you're looking forward to in 2025 or even beyond, now that we're in a more, I shudder to say it sometimes, a more gun-friendly climate. Again, we heard about it last time through the Trump slump. We're in a gun-friendly climate. People kind of stop buying firearms. They're not worried about them being restricted, and that causes depression, sales depression across the entire firearms industry. That's the other side of the double-edged sword when we elect somebody who's pro-gun.
So there's gonna be some pros and cons on kind of the commercial retail end. The bad news for retailers is, we might see the reemergence of the Trump slump. Sales go just way, way down. So that's bad news if you're a retailer. That's good news if you're a buyer.
Right.
Because prices will come down as well. Okay. It's going to be bad news or good news for a retailer. We'll try to balance it out for retailers, for FFLs in general, because I was seeing FFLs have their license threatened and taken away for things that weren't even necessarily a warning sometimes, if you go back, say, 10 plus years ago, right? So we're going to see, I imagine, very different treatment of FFLs. And I'm talking about, it's kind of like if you got your taxes audited, there's a 100% chance, particularly if you own a business, that like an IRS auditing agent is going to say you should have turned left where your accountant went right somewhere, right? And don't get me wrong, there's malicious ways you can do that as somebody who's trying to comply with the tax code. You can try to not comply with the tax code. But if you're trying to comply with the tax code, sometimes there's just questions about how do I classify this versus that. Well, your accountant gives you advice, do it this way. Okay, that seems reasonable to me, I'll do it that way. IRS agent says, no, you should have done the other way. Right, so if you're an FFL, same thing happens, right? If FFLs got audited, there's a super high degree chance that someone along the line, some employee or whatever, failed to dot an I, failed to cross a T, went left where they should have gone right, you name it, something like that. There's a tremendous amount of moving parts, but that doesn't mean that the non-compliance was malicious. It doesn't mean it was structural or repeated. Sometimes it is, but I would expect that the treatment of FFLs, there has been a lot of trust that has been lost between FFLs and ATF based on many FFLs I've spoken to across the country, where they used to be able to ask questions about stuff, and now they're worried, am I going to lose my license if I ask this question?
If I ask the question, I'm shining the spotlight on my business.
Exactly, right. I mean, there's only so many times you can use the old hypothetical friend before, the agent might go, that sounds kind of curious. So I would hope that there's going to be a better relationship there. We'll obviously see who Trump appoints as head of the ATF, and we'll see what that person does, whether or not we're going to see an individual try to dismantle the agency, reshuffle things around. I mean, hope for the roof, hope for the sky, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, hopefully we won't have the always thinking forfeiture as part of the ATF mantra coming out of this new area. Tom, politics, as always, gives us something to talk about, so I'm waiting to hear what other folks want to say down in the comments section. Let us know things we should be researching for you out there, but your insight's always valuable. Love talking to you. Thanks again, Tom.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, before you go, let me ask you, are you breaking these gun laws without even knowing it? Get a free concealed carry map that reveals the gun laws in your state and the states you might be traveling to. Click the link in the description below to check it out.